Atheism has been around for a long, long time, but quite frankly, no one in the ancient world was an atheist. Everybody believed in some kind of god or gods. The Stoics, everyone, there's either a primal force, there's something. Nowadays, and then it went through different waves. Nowadays, the new atheism, like I said, is more anti-theist than anything else. They will be naturalist, so they believe that all that exists is nature. That's all that exists. That means, and technically speaking, it means every cause of an effect is composed of matter or energy. What caused that? Whatever it is, it was natural causes. How'd they die? Natural causes. Natural causes. Now you say, well, that's not right. So if David dies and they say, we think Gene did it, we say, well, that's not natural because Gene did it. Yeah, but the behavior, the thought she had, the motivation, all of it can be narrowed down to something composed of matter and energy. Because in naturalist, there's no soul. There's nothing like that. It's just everything's natural. And most atheists in the world, most people in the world you're going to meet are by default naturalists. It's what's taught in any chemistry textbook, biology. The assumption is that we're in a closed fishbowl and there's nothing out. So if you ever say, I think God did it, you sound moronic because you're breaking the rules of naturalism. Why would you do that? And I suggest, I think there's a lot of things naturalism cannot answer. There's a lot of facts of reality that everybody knows. They're facts. They're real. They may not exist on their own in the sense of like a table exists, but they're real facts that everyone assumes, but they're not made of matter and energy, like numbers, like morality, like consciousness, and we'll talk about several of these things. And then the other belief that we talked about was scientism, or logical positivism, and that's the methodology that every single thing we're going to know about reality in the fishbowl will be discovered by the scientific method. And if science cannot discover it, it's a dumb question. If you don't know it now, give it time. Scientists will figure it out. If they can't, it was a dumb question to begin with. That's really what they say. I've heard many scientists say that. It's a nonsense question. So if I say, explain to me why I like sunsets, where's the mathematical formula for that? Well, there's no reason for that, or it's a dumb question, or there's a biological survival need for that. There's got to be some explanation. And if not, it's just a just so story is what they call it. Okay. So all I'm saying is those are two views. Now, like I said before, nothing I'm going to say is a drop-down Naga argument. They're going to go, I'm silenced. The critics are silenced. Any other intelligent, educated atheist will have a response to these things. The issue is you and I are a judge and jury whenever someone makes a claim. Remember I talked about that? You make a claim, the burden of proof lies on you. That includes for us if we say, I believe Jesus rose from the dead. That's a claim. The answer is, why do you think that? Why are you a Christian? If someone says, I think that's all nonsense. That's a claim. Why do you think it's nonsense? Well, I think naturalism is true. Why is that? It's okay to ask them that. Why is that? Whenever there's a claim. And so a lot of times, I'm telling you, if you have a conversation with a person and you're thinking calmly and you're listening to what they're saying, it will really reduce the anxiety you feel instead of, I've got to have an answer to everything. No, you don't. As soon as a claim comes out of their mouth, you're not jumping on them and you're not making fun. You're not being hateful. You're just, why do you think that? You just listen to, why do you think that? And then the issue is, when they're talking, you're the jury, like in a courtroom analogy, you're listening. Do I find that convincing? If you do, great, say it. That's a good point. You compelled me. If not, I don't find that convincing. No, thank you. That's it. It's just it's that simple. And it works both ways. I hear your evidence about Jesus and whatever, and I'm not convincing. Well, that's okay. And there are consequences for believing in something that's false. Now, the analogy, I can go to my medicine cabinet. I don't really have one, but kind of. And if I just it doesn't matter, just grab one. Just grab one. Mom, I have a headache. Just grab one. There are consequences for getting that wrong. Well, I don't like that. That's not fair. It's not right. Well, okay, but reality is not like that. Reality doesn't work that way. It doesn't matter what you feel about it. So if the Christian worldview is true, there are consequences for not believing in it. And if they're right, there are consequences for getting it wrong too. We might do wrong things on their system and so forth. That's it. Okay, so then I talked about, at the very bottom of page, whatever page it is for y'all, what is that, 1 or 2? Quite 3 layers of probability. I have a master copy. I don't have that. Well, actually, I do. Well, actually, it's on page 1. Sorry. Okay. So number 1 is, so the way I think about it is, and this is me, it doesn't have to be you, is I think about layers of probability. And the question is quite probable. And I left off last week at number one. I think God's the best explanation for why anything exists. There's an old German philosopher named Leibniz, and he would ask that question basically, and it was if anything exists. And this contingency argument asks the question, look, if something exists, it either exists because it has an explanation for its existence, because it must exist, or because it was caused, therefore contingent. And that's it. I mean, think about that. Where'd the table come from? Does it necessarily exist that way? Must it have been here? Or is it contingent, brought into being somehow? Well, everybody would say it's what? It's contingent. I mean, it's not, why in the world would a table be necessary? And we all know where tables come from. Well, that applies to the building. Let's get bigger. Is this building necessarily must be here, or is it contingent? Well, we think that's contingent. What about Lawrence? I mean, we can get bigger and bigger. What about the U.S.? That's contingent. What about the Earth? Well, we know that's contingent too, because it didn't necessarily. Every astrophysicist would say that came from matter before it. What you just get bigger and bigger. You're still asking. It's a still legitimate question. Let's get as big as the universe. It either exists because it must exist, or because it was brought from somewhere. And Leibniz would say that. The German philosopher Leibniz said, and I do too, that there's no reason at all to believe, I don't think, that the universe necessarily exists. It needs to be here. I just don't find that compelling. I don't see anything about quarks and leptons and black holes that they just have to be here. Now, a naturalist is going to say, so what? It has to be. You're just wrong. Okay. I don't find that compelling. I think it's contingent. So I think God's the best explanation why anything's here at all. Now, these other ones I'm going to go kind of fast on because I just am because of time, but also I'm not sure how much you really care, and that's fine. If you do, hey, slow me down. Number two, why the universe had a beginning. Okay, let me say a couple things about the universe and having a beginning and all that. Okay. Everybody who's anybody knows that the universe began to exist. And of course, was it Hoyle who called it the Big Bang? That's not what originally was called. It was fought and fought and fought by science. Einstein did not believe in it. Even though his calculations led him to have a beginning, they didn't want it. They liked what was called a steady state theory. Steady state. And that just means basically it was eternal. I did it backwards. Steady state. And they fought it because, and the literature demonstrates this, because it sounded like creation. It sounded like Genesis. And they fought it and fought it and fought it and fought it. And so they finally came down to say, okay, and a guy named Edwin Hubble, you know the Hubble telescope. Hello. I'm on page 1, number 2. Edwin Hubble said, well, he saw in his telescope, and this isn't that long ago. This is all within your lifetimes. All of it. Not me and Lane so much, or Chelsea, but all the old people. No, this isn't that. It's just a few decades ago. This is recent. Everybody thought the universe was eternal. It was a steady state. And come to find out, it wasn't. Because when you look into space, come to find out, hello, here's 3 more handouts. Come to find out, when you look at the stars, when light moves, y'all know light moves, right? Okay. As it stretches out, the farther it goes, the waves of a light stretch out. And the longer waves are orange and reddish. And so it's called the redshift. So the farther away it is, the more red it is, because the light beams have been stretched out. One of the shortest wavelengths of the light spectrum is blue, which is why the sky is blue to disperse the most. And the oceans are blue and all that. Okay, so he would look and notice in this big telescope, he measured it and could tell that you could measure that some were more red than others, and they were moving. Not only were they just static, whatever they're doing, they're moving away from each other. And on top of that, the great discovery was the universe isn't just moving away, it's speeding up as it goes. So that's bizarre. So why in the world is it doing that? So all the bottom line is, I'm really going to spare you this unless you want to talk about it more. I love my astronaut nerd talk. It was a big deal. Einstein went to go visit Edwin Hubble's telescope and he came out and said, I'm a believer. I saw it for myself. The redshift is real. If it's going out, what happens if you rewind the tape? It had to have had a what? It had to have had a beginning. Because if it's going out, like an explode, boom, if you go backwards, it would have had some beginning. And so now, in fact, now it's so commonly held, it's called the Standard Model. The Standard Model, nicknamed the Big Bang. It was nicknamed that to make fun of it. Oh, like this big old bang. Well, it wasn't big and it wasn't a bang. It was actually from a state of nothingness. And so a lot of Christians I have found don't like the concept of a Big Bang, and I don't know why they don't. I don't know why. But anyway, that is by far the standard model. And that's been the view for a long, long, long time. Okay, and this is where I really am going to, do I even bring it up? Well, I do bring it up because I have in parentheses multiverse. The last couple of decades have been exciting for mathematicians and physicists because based on their equations, the problem is the universe as it is really, 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 really fine-tuned for life. And some things are staggeringly amazing. Here's one little quick thing, what's so amazing about it. If there was a Big Bang, and it, as it were, and it came in all of a sudden, then we would expect to see leftover radiation from that basic initial, you might say explosion, but, well, guess what they found a few decades ago? This is recent. They found it. The WMAP, it's a satellite system in other places, other devices, it's measured back, it's called background radiation noise. And if you'll see pictures on Google, it's green. Well, it's not perfect, but it's almost perfect. Across the whole universe, as far as they can tell, it's almost universally dispersed. That's really weird because of the process necessary. It's like one scientist said it this way. It's like if I got, how do I form green? Is it blue and yellow? Blue and yellow. If I got blue paint and yellow paint, and as I poured them out, as soon as they touch, they're instantaneously green and poured out in a green bucket. It's instantaneous and uniform everywhere. Well, there's that and many other things that are absolute mystery for decades. Like, how in the world is that the case? And the number one theory they came up with, based on some math as well, the guy who really is the father of what's called the multiverse, is still alive. He still is. Anyway, there's a lot of guys. I'm trying not to give you too many details. Okay, the guys are still alive. You can look them on YouTube because this is so recent in physics. And he came up with an idea called inflation. And inflation is the idea that at the very beginning, when it all happened, within a nanosecond, in fact, like a millionth of a millionth of a millionth of a second, there was a gargantuan inflation process, and then it slowed down. So what we see now in the universe, I'm on board here, like all this time period, if Earth is over here, this time period of what we see all the stars and galaxies, it's relatively recent. It's old, but this inflationary period, well, I best imagine it's just something blowing up. Imagine a balloon. I go to the grocery store and you do helium, and you put the balloon on the lid, it goes, whoosh, it's real fast. You see the balloon, it's this little, and all of a sudden it's boom. Well, then they can slow down if they want to kind of top it off. Well, that's like that. That's the idea of the universe, is that it went whoosh, real fast, and then it's been slowing down the last couple of billion years. Okay, because of that, the theory is that there's different ways to think about, well, if that's true, there might be other universes. And just spare me, the answer is there a universe as we know it, we just haven't recorded? And that's very likely, because we can only see so many billion miles away because sunlight takes time to travel. You realize that? So the sun is just burning right now, though we can't see it's burning. It takes about 8 minutes for the sun's light to travel to Earth. So if the sun exploded, we'd see the sun for 8 minutes before all of a sudden it hit us. Well, it had been exploded for 8 minutes before we saw it. Boom. Which means technically, you never ever see the present. You only see in the past. Because you can only see as long as it takes the light here. So when I turn the lights on here, the switch, it happens what seems to us almost simultaneous, but it's not simultaneous. It takes a fraction of a millisecond for the light to turn on and then bounce off the walls, hit my eyeball, and then my brain and my mind recognizes it. So I'm not seeing as you are right now. I'm seeing you in the past because the light has to take time to get here. Well, you expand it over billions of light years, and then it gets really, really far. It takes a long time. Then light travels like molasses. When it's that big, it's a slow-moving process. But in a small space, it's lightning, faster than lightning. Tracking? Okay, I'm going to stop there. The point is, one of the most dominant theories in physics today is that the universe had a beginning. Then the question is, if it had a beginning, are there other universes out there? And it is a very attractive, popular theory these days. And so versus going to all there are a lot of problems with that or difficulties and some possible solutions some rejoinders to it. What I think is God's the best explanation no matter what. So either we have the standard model, which is there's just one Big Bang, or there's multiple universes and there's different kinds of bangs out there. I'm still convinced that they don't necessarily had to have happened. And I'll give you one case in point, and I'm going to move on. I just break them all. I just said I won't talk nerd. Okay, well, I will. Because one of the dominant theories, one of the dominant theories in inflation is that there's a vacuum. 1C or there's a 1C. Yeah. That there is what's called a quantum vacuum. It's like a universe birther, a universe machine maker. And it's popping out like bubbles, these different universes. Well, of course, it just backs the problem up one, which is, of course, where did that come from? Does it have to, the universes have to be born? Do they have to, in that sense, born? It just seems to me they don't have to be. So I think God's the best explanation of why the universe had a beginning. And even if there are multiple universes, I think it's the best explanation. And this leads to number 3. The universe has constants and quantities that are needed for life. They're needed, not kind of, sort of, but they're needed. And if you take, for example, in the atom, there are forces at work, the strong nuclear electronic force. There's tons of these things. One thing's called the cosmological constant. It's the speed at which the universe is expanding. It's got to be fine-tuned to about 10 to the 120th power. I mean, it's an astronomical number. Most physicists think there are about 10 to the 80 atoms in the entire universe. So think how big that number is, 120 zeros. So these kind of things have to be fine-tuned. Gravity has to be the exact force it's at. I mean, everything has to be like at a dial, just click just right. So imagine on a dial of a safety unit, those just like my kid has a locker at school and he's spinning around. Is that 40 numbers, I think it is? That sounds right? 40 or 50? 20? Or whatever.
It goes to probably 40.
40, yeah? Imagine instead of 40 clicks, it's billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of clicks. And one click away, life doesn't form. Not just human life, but stars don't form. If the universe expanded too slowly, all the mass would have gone and slammed back on top of itself and never have formed planets, stars, anything. Expanded too fast, it would have been like TNT exploding, and the mass would have traveled so far away, gravity would never have slowed it down. So that force has to be just right, and on and on and on it goes. So it's begged the question for a long time, why in the world is the universe just right for us to be here? To which atheists go, you're such a speciesist. There's more worms than you. Okay, then why are worms here? Why is it fine-tuned for worms? Or microbes? The point is life exists, and it's not just human life, it's life in general. It just exists. Why is that? And one of the ways around that argument is number 2. They're going to say, well, there's there's infinite. If you're a string theorist, you believe there are 10 to the 500 universes. And they'll say, because of that, it's just a crapshoot. So eventually, one of the universes is going to have all the fine-tuned constants you want. And that's very, very problematic, but that's one thing they say. And Christians have their response to that as well. It goes back and forth. I think God's the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life. It's almost like we were meant to be here. And I give the analogy in my book. If I go into a room and see chairs and a whiteboard and a desk, and I go, I wonder if this was designed for something. I'm going to call this a classroom. And then the naturalist goes, that's just stupid. Come on now. We all know there's an infinite amount of classrooms. Eventually one of them was going to have chairs in order and lined up. I mean, and that's possible. It's one of those things, I just don't think that's probable. I think it screams out, if it is fine-tuned, I think there's a fine-tuner. Number 4, the laws of nature at all. The laws of gravity. There's the speed of light. There's all kinds of things. There's a principle at work in science, in the philosophy of science, and it's called the law of uniformity. And that's not the law of gravity. The law of uniformity assumes that it's going to be uniform anywhere in the universe. We have no reason scientifically to believe that the speed of light is the same in the Andromeda galaxy, our closest galaxy. We don't have any reason to believe that. We assume it. We just assume it. We can't travel there. And we'll never travel there in our lifetime. It's too far away. There's no conceivable way to travel. But we assume this uniformity exists all over the place, that it's a law, that as if it's built into the fabric of the universe to have a consistent law. Science can't tell us at all where it comes from and why it has to be this way. If it does have to be this way, I think God's the best explanation for why there are laws of nature. Having said that, what I mean is, I think God, in a Christian worldview, sustains it. Sustains it. I don't think God pushes down apples from apple trees to cause gravity. I don't think his hand's out there going, and shoving Pluto away. It's not planted anyway. I don't like it. and earth away. I think there are laws at work that he designed, but I think he's the best explanation for why there's uniform laws in the universe. That's a very bizarre thing. Scientists know it's bizarre. They're just, if they're naturalists, they're going to say, it's just a mystery, we don't know. And we'll never know. That's what they're going to say, because they're a naturalist. I'm not a naturalist, so I'll say, maybe there's something else. Maybe there's another reason. Number 5, I say why the universe is, quote, rational and comports to mathematics perfectly. Einstein said this all the time. It's not all the time, but he and many scientists say it often. It's one of the greatest mysteries of all science. Why is it the universe fits our mathematical equations perfectly? Why is that? Why is it we can look at the movement of planets and perturbations and the gravity waves and we'll go, oh, I bet if it's x squared, blah, 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 and you go, that's it. It matches perfectly. That goes back to Newton. And it's just been around. Why in the world? Now, he wasn't perfect. We've corrected since then. We humans, not me, but not I. Why is it? Why is it we can do things that are, it seems, crying out to be explained by rational explanations? Now, think about that. We don't see unicorns popping into existence on the moon. All of a sudden it turns into cheese, then turns into something else. And why is it all of a sudden a black hole pops for no reason? We don't know what happened. There's black hole. There's no. It follows patterns, and then we can do mathematically, and it fits it perfectly. We can write on a whiteboard. It just seems rational. I think God's the best explanation for why the universe is crying out for rational explanation. Now I'm going to shift gears. I think in your handout I gave books to read. And there's a lot there you can go. So go read all your hearts out. In fact, I even gave you some atheists there who give explanations of their view, and you can read both. There you go. And maybe on an audiobook too, I don't know. And these authors, by the way, for those of you who like YouTube, look up these authors on YouTube. And a lot of these guys have websites. Do I list Hugh Ross? He's got a website. I don't like everything he does, but he's a brilliant astrophysicist. He has a great website, so look up him. All kinds of great free videos online, free lectures, free debates. I mean, it's just there for the taking. So I would use it up. One of the best debates I've gone to, and most of it was kind of in my head, was in New Orleans, William Lane Craig debated Sean Carroll, who teaches at MIT. Huh?
About to say, over your head, I was there too.
Oh, yeah.
I was like,
Because it was very scientifically precise and deep, and on and on. I was trying to track with her. One time Elaine, she was kind of looking around bored. She wrote a little note. She put, I don't know what's going on. She passed it to me. Or, I love you. Or whatever. I'm like, I know, thank you. But it was full of, it was great. That's on YouTube for free. I mean, you can watch the debate. We were there. It was great. That's where I first met Billy Craig. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears and go to something else even more fun. Number 6. Okay, if you don't know this, just in case, inside of all living things, there's something called DNA, and DNA is needed because it is instructions. It's a manual to tell your cells how to form together in very precise, specific, complex patterns to connect to other very specific, complex patterns. Then they connect to others, and all together, they form a cell. Then those cells form together, protein. Then proteins then form a cell. And it takes a whole bunch of those to fill the smallest thing. Amoeba has about over 2 million pages worth of information in a single cell amoeba. Over 2 million. Think how many books I would line up the wall. And one single amoeba. And it's coding. Bill Gates of Microsoft said it's the most advanced software code he's ever seen in his life, that conceivable. And it's in the cell. And DNA and RNA is that information. So there's a book there, the Women's Inspirational Bible. And I said, look, it's a book, or the notes are in front of you. You open it up and say, look, I'm reading this. Or better yet, a manual of how to build a house, because big man's in the back. And it says, here are the blueprints. Well, this is instructions on how to put the walls together, how to nail, how to do this. The very first question, I wonder where this came from. If you said nowhere, just popped into existence. If you said, no, it's a natural process over time, eventually, given enough time, this book is going to form. If you find that compelling, then you'd find compelling what an atheist says about DNA. Then you'd find that very compelling. The other explanation is that information comes from a mind. In our existence, information only comes from a mind. You could blow the wind for trillions of years in the forest, and I'm convinced at no time will the leaves form into a sonnet from Shakespeare or information on how to build a plane. Get all the years you want. It's not going to happen because information comes from a mind. And so inside of the cell is information. The question is, where did it come from? Right now, the leading theory, since it's impossible to recreate in a lab, the leading theory is either A, it was on a comet that landed on the Earth and it first there and got in kind of plasmic pools and then eventually formed, or 2, aliens dropped it off. That's called transpermia. It's the panspermia. It's the top 2 theories going. Is that aliens dropped it off or a comet? But the scholars I read, and the specialists I read, and these are atheist specialists, they'll say, well, we're still trying to find it, but there's not hope at all in trying to find it. And there's several reasons why that it could not have been formed on Earth, and it's because the conditions of Earth back then, when Earth is dated to have started millions and millions of years ago, it was the atmosphere just immediately corroded the chemicals. It was so harsh to life that it's virtually impossible that it could have formed back then. And so, not to mention, all the studies I've seen that put how many millions of years it would have taken by natural random mutation to get to a place, to finally form one cell, is longer than the existence of the universe. So there's a problem there. So it got sped up somehow. So what they're going to say is, well, it didn't start on Earth, it came from a comet or alien dropped off. Then the question, of course, is, where did that come from? And they say, well, we don't know yet. That's what they're going to say. We don't know yet. That's what they're going to say. Don't know yet. Well, we don't know yet. That's true, except perhaps what if God developed it that way? Now, I don't have it, and the Bible certainly does not have an explanation how that happened. There is no scientific, and by that I don't mean naturalistic, but scientific explanation, a chemical, material explanation of how DNA was created. We don't know. I just still think God's the best explanation of where information comes from. I think it's the best explanation for it. Okay, any questions about that, comments so far? Okay. Kathy's regretting they come by now? I don't know. Not too. Okay, good. Whatevs. Number 7. I'm convinced objective moral values exist. What is an objective moral value? Something is objective when it is not subjective, which means it's person independent. It is subject independent. What that means is it doesn't depend on my preference for it. It's simply just true. So it's something, think of it this way. Think of it, it's not literally above us, but if me and Roxanne are standing here and we're appealing to something, as it were, outside of both of us. When I say, that's true, that's false, she said, no, that's wrong. We're both appealing to something way outside of, as it were, of ourselves, and we're going, no, you're wrong, no, you're wrong. We're both assuming there's a thing called wrong, which means there's a thing called right. We're both assuming there's a thing called right and wrong. Let me ask you this question. Is it morally neutral, all moral, or is it good or bad to torture babies for fun? This isn't a trick question. I'd say that some of you look like you're baffling. Okay, that's wrong. Okay, good. But you're assuming there's a thing called... Now, when you say it's wrong, does that mean you just don't prefer it? Like you don't prefer chocolate ice cream?
No, that would be evil.
Right, but you see the distinction. Because subjectivity means I just don't prefer it. I don't prefer pistachio or peanuts. I don't prefer whatever. Well, I like peanuts. I don't prefer broccoli. I don't prefer whatever. If someone said it's wrong to eat broccoli, that's different from I don't like broccoli. Objective morality says, I'm not saying I think it's wrong to torture babies. I'm saying it is wrong. Therefore, I think it's wrong. It simply is wrong. If I think it's Bill Craig who says, for example, I think it's wrong to murder the Jews because you think they're an inferior race. Even if the Nazis had won, it still would have been wrong what they did. Even if right now they ruled over Europe and all of Asia, it would still have been wrong. Even if all the people in the world converted and said, it's just wrong. The amount of people is irrelevant. How passionate they are is irrelevant. How authentic they are. How much they cry. How much they want to die for that belief. They're just wrong. To use a different analogy is math. 2 + 2 = 4. I don't care if you like that or not. Well, I don't like the number 4. I want it to be horses. 2 + 2 = horses. Okay? I hear you. You're wrong. Well, David, there's a lot of people who have different answers than you. Yep. And I can go to my daughter's class and find a lot of different answers on a math quiz. And the math teacher never, ever, ever, I used to tell my students, the next period, go to your math teacher and say, well, that's what you think. But I think the number is 4.7. I mean, who are you to judge me? That's what I want it to be. I see how that works. They never tried it. I think one time they did. They thought it was so funny. I said, tell them that. Don't tell them I said so, but, and see what happens. That's silly. It's silly. No one goes, how dare you? When there's a red mark on the paper, you go, oh, you might be closer to the truth than your neighbor. The answer was 4.7, you got 4.5. Other person wrote down star. Okay, well, it's not a star. You're at least to have a number. That's good for you. You're closer, but you're both wrong. Well, morality works that way. Morality works that way. In fact, if you don't, in old school, it used to be called the law of nature, law of human nature. Now we call it the moral law. The moral law is this sense that within all of us, we sense, or rather, we appeal to something that's above us all. When we say things like the German Socialist Party, blah, whatever it's called, the Nazi Party, was wrong to do that, when anybody says that, they're assuming some political parties are better than others. When you say one country's better, you're assuming some countries, you're appealing to some standard beyond the country, no matter what it is. When I say this thing, it's immoral and despicable to torture babies for fun, I don't care who you are. In fact, if you disagree with that statement, there's something wrong with you. In fact, we have a word for people who, and this is difficult in specialists, as far as I understand from the specialists, we can help us. There's a term for a person who either doesn't feel compunction or guilt and or has no awareness of the moral law. A sociopath. Yeah, sociopathy. And sociopathy affects a small percentage of the population. I've seen different figures, between 2 to 5% of that or something like that roughly. I'm not exactly sure how to define it. Either they don't sense it or they don't feel compunction or both. It's difficult. The point is these people need locked up. And we think they are wrong. We have a disorder for it. And it's not judgmental. It's saying that you don't work out. About 2% of the world's population suffers from dyscalculia. It's the inability to do mathematics. Well, does that mean all mathematics is relative? It's just throw our hands up. Who knows? We say, no, you've got a disorder. There's something wrong with you. That means you can't do mathematics. Well, that's what we assume about morality forever until the last couple of decades. In the last couple of decades, something overtook in the 60s, and it started in philosophical schools, and it led over to art, and then it led over to all kinds of stuff. And it started with something called deconstructionism, which led into a popular term of relativism. And that is, what's true for you is not true for me, it's all relative and so forth. And it's bled over from the 60s, thanks a lot, 60s people. All because you didn't like black and white, leave it to Beaver, then you had to, hey, I don't grow my hair out and be a hippie. Okay. And then that just bled over to everything. So now we are still children, grandchildren, great-great-great-grandchildren of the 60s, and it's relativism, and what's true for you is not true for me, it's all relative, whatever, which is absolute nonsense. I know people in this church who very much believe there's no such thing as right and wrong, which in itself is self-contradictory. Because my next question is, you sure about that? Or am I wrong to have my view? Yeah, you should have my view. Okay, so you're right and I'm wrong. No, there are no right. I mean, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And nonsense is what it is. It's logical absurdity. Nevertheless, that doesn't stop people from believing it. Because people don't want to be judged. They don't want to be judged. That's the number one sin of all American, and I'll stop preaching, but it is. The number one thing you can call a person and be mean-spirited is intolerant. That's the number one thing. And that assumes a relativism claim. People are very, 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 very kind and loving to you when you agree with them. And if you don't, you're intolerant, and they'll do whatever they can to push you out. Now, forever, that was the view until the relativism. Now, today, what about atheists? Do atheists believe in objective moral values? Many, many of them do believe in them. Not all. Not all. And there's all kinds of books you can read on that by Sam Harris and otherwise, but many do. And that's why so many atheists would never murder an innocent person, even though they're atheists. Atheism does not make you go kill people, doesn't make you steal things. It just means there's no reason not to do it. Now, I would debate an atheist who says, well, I believe in objective moral values because it's right to take care of my neighbor. My question is going to be, why? Because, just be consistent with this. This is where they get really angry, because I've heard the debates and I've had conversations. They get really mad about this point. I'm not doing this to make him mad. I'm doing it because I'm logically consistent. If we are merely evolved primates on a speck of dust in a vast universe in which we exist, what possible reason would you give me for the question, why shouldn't I kill everybody who gets in the way of my survival? It happens all the time in the animal kingdom. You will never hear CNN special. This morning, a lion murdered a lion. It murdered a gazelle. This morning, a big white shark raped another shark. It's horrible what's going on. Never going to happen. We watch those shows that show up on the Nature Channel all the time. They kill them and go, man, I feel. Elaine goes, oh. And I don't like to see it either. But no one thinks something immoral is taking place because they're only being they're being animals. That's all they're doing what animals do. If a human walked by, Brock just walks by and says, I want to rape her, jumps on top and has his way with her. And you walk, hey, it's evolution. Who's going to blame him? That wouldn't happen. They would pull him off, you get arrested, you get in trouble, and that's just by his wife. If there is no moral law, and we're just simply evolved primates, then morality is an illusion. All it is social etiquette. It's a biological delusion to help us survive as a species. That's all it is. And that's what many atheists say. We should follow it, but it is a delusion. There's nothing right about saving someone who's hurting or not torturing babies for fun. There's nothing wrong with that. We say that in society because we want to help ourselves survive and the species survive. But it's not wrong to do that. There's no such thing as right and wrong. Right and wrong are terms we use to describe our behavior that societies have approved of. To which people like me come back and say, so, when the Nazis said it's okay to murder all the Jews, they said, well, for them it was. For them it was the right thing to do. And they've said this is exactly what, I'm not kidding, this is exactly what they say. He asked the question, so do you think it's wrong that the Nazis killed all the Jews? They say, well, I don't prefer it. I wouldn't have done it. But again, who am I to judge them? If you're being consistent, you have to say that. You have to say it's not wrong what they did. I just wouldn't do it. I say, why don't you want to do it? I don't think that would be nice. Well, who cares if it's nice? Who cares? I mean, Hitler's whole program was based off a program called eugenics. Eugenics, good genes. And eugenics was started because it was based off of, now it's not his fault, it came from Darwin's evolution. And that was Darwin's model that, he didn't say this, I think it was in the 8th edition. In fact, from what I understand, he didn't like the phrase, but a friend wrote to him and said, you should call it the survival of the fittest. Though he never liked the phrase. It was introduced in the last edition, and it wasn't his phrase. But nevertheless, this idea that the strongest, most adapted, not strongest, but those most adapted to culture or society survives, that turned into social Darwinism, and the term for social Darwinism was eugenics, good genes. And this was the backbone of what's-her-name who started Planned Parenthood. It was to kill all the black people off. She went around and gave lectures. You can read all this online. All of her letters are posted. Her lectures are posted. She wanted to get rid of them. She said they're the most uneducated, the worst for society. If you are a black person, if you're in a black woman's womb, you are the most susceptible to death in the world. 7 to 8 out of 10 black babies are killed in the womb. It almost worked. She almost got rid of the entire black race because she went on election and they convinced all the people and started Planned Parenthood. Now, I'm not saying everyone who works in Planned Parenthood wants to kill the black people. I'm saying this is where it came from. And this idea is exactly what Hitler believed. Read Mein Kampf. Well, don't, but read your Bible first, and then after, sandwich it. He says the same it comes from the exact same thing, kill off the species that get in our way. For him, it wasn't black people. It was, of course, everybody. It was Jews, gypsies, homosexuals. Anyone who didn't have blonde hair, blue eyes, I'd have been out. So all I'm saying is, I'm being very clear. I do not think for a second that atheism necessarily leads to killing off the Jews, no, absolutely it doesn't. You can meet some very kind, quote-unquote, moral atheists. Yes, you can. What I'm talking about is what we call in philosophy what's called the grounding principle. If I'm saying grounding in philosophy means what's the ground, the basis of something. And I used to do this to my students all the time. I would say, is it wrong to pick up anything? Is it wrong to rape? Well, yeah. Why is it? And I write on the board like arrow. Well, because some. Okay, why is that wrong? Because so-and-so. Why is that wrong? And I did this exercise on purpose all the time because I wanted to get to the place where the rock bottom was, is it just wrong? You shouldn't do it. And I said, that's my point. And that ground zero, grounding it's just the wrong thing to do. It's called a brute fact. It's just wrong. Is 2 + 2 = 4? Yeah. Why? It just is. It's just 4-ness. It comes from Aristotle. It makes sense. 2 of these, 2 of these equals 4 of these. It's a brute fact. There's no beneath it. There's no iceberg beneath it. And everybody across almost all people in all cultures of all time, as long as you've had history of written language, has believed that some things are simply right and some things are simply wrong. Now let me say this one last thing, and I'll pause there. So I think is God's the best explanation for why ethics are grounded. That is, it is right, it is wrong. Now I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Just a second. To be very clear about this, morality is not what happens. It's not what happens. Morality is what we ought to do. It's what we ought to do. It's what we should do. It's what we feel compelled to do. And a guy a long time ago, a philosopher, comes up with something called I'm not giving too many details. Okay, he came up with a fallacy, and that's the problem with the fallacy of evolution. Well, if it evolved over time, eventually we get morality. No, you can't do that. You cannot get an ought from an is. You cannot get an ought from an is. If I do this, I drop this on the floor, and I go, oh, it should not have fallen there. It shouldn't be on its side like that. That tree fell down. It should not have done that. It's wrong to do. That's silly. It just happened. Now, just like with the lion analogy or the laws of nature. No, there's no should to it. No matter how much this happens in the universe, it just happened. I cannot confer from that. I cannot deduce. You know what? I bet it should fall that way from now on. I bet it's morally wrong to fall on any other side. That'd be silly. I mean, it's just silly nonsense. You can't get an ought from an is. Ought comes from somewhere else. And the question is then, why does morality feel like an ought? Why does morality is not what we do, it's what we should do. C.S. Lewis said, it's like keys on a piano, which we're up here and it's gone now. He said, morality, instincts that we have are the keys, but the music is the moral law. It tells us which keys to push. So for example, I'll make a modern analogy that he's a little different one, but if I'm going down the road, I'm going up 11th Street, and then there's a car on fire, and I see people kind of escape from it. I'm going to have 2 instincts, very, very powerful instincts in me. One is get the heck out of Dodge because it might blow up and I'm hot, and the instinct survival is very strong. That's one of the keys. The other instinct is to help. It's the right thing to do, whatever. I ought to do it. That's 2 instincts. One is help, one is run. Help and run. At least those are the 2. And depending on what it is at this church, I might keep going. I'm just kidding. That's just a joke. Susan, I'm see if you're listening. Just good. That's awful. I'm just joking. The 2 instincts. The moral law tells us which instinct to suppress and which one to embrace. And Lewis says what's interesting is the moral law almost always tells us to embrace the one that will cause the most harm, the one we least want to do. That is, our most strongest impulse is run because we're going to, that brain says you got to survive. But the moral law tells us you ought to go help them. And so we suppress the instinct to run, and like Lewis says, those are the keys. Which instinct do we push? The moral law tells us which one. That's the music, which one to play. And since moral law feels like a commandment, and you ought to go do this, the question is, where does a commandment come from in nature? It can't. So the question is, if anything moral value is a commandment, the question is there a commander? I think there is. I think God's the best explanation. Now, David, what does that mean? The grounding issue, I think, and this is called the, Lord, I'm thinking of several words right now. I think that the reason why we feel like we ought to do something is because it comes from God's very own nature. I think our soul picks up on that, like radio waves, antennas of a radio pick up radio waves that we can't see and we can't feel. But right now, we are being inundated, all of us right now, with radio waves. And I'm assuming you can't pick up a radio station with your ears, noses, eyeglasses, but neutrinos of the universe are passing through us. Neutrinos are so small, they can pass through the entire planet and never touch an atom. Well, they're passing through us. Well, guess what? We don't pick up on it. And I'm convinced that if we have the right antenna, we pick up the radio signals. I'm convinced our soul does pick up on that radio signal called God's moral character. It's grounded into it. And so this commandment theory is the idea that we feel we ought to do things because God is commanding it. He's the commander. And it's this sense, and that's why humans pick it up. And the higher primates, higher primates, chimps and whatever, they might follow some degree of that. And that does not mean it comes from evolution. It means that that shows how universal this moral law is. That's what it demonstrates. So the question again is, if morality feels like an ought, why does it feel like an ought? And atheists and naturalists will say, because it just does, society tells us that, it's been fobbed on us, it's an illusion. Your great-great-great-grandpappies have been all the way back to the deserts 15,000 years ago when our Homo sapien ancestors arose. They said, hey guys, we got to get along or we won't survive. And that's all that's been passed down forever. And there's massive problems with that. Why do people go into fire when they know it's going to kill them? On and on it goes. Let me pause there. What questions or comments do you have about that?
Learn it.
Great question.
So we have
Good
to
point.
be taught.
Sorry, you didn't say question. Why to be taught? Yeah,
But even a child knows right from wrong.
You know, when you're
They know.
Well, maybe actually it's difficult to tell how much a child knows right and wrong. It's difficult to tell. C.S. Lewis makes at some point, you said they had to learn right and wrong. Well, let's assume for a second they do. C.S. Lewis was exactly right. You need to read Mere Christianity. He nails it. He's awesome. Well, I have to learn math. 2 + 2 = 4 is not relative because I was taught that by a math teacher. It was revealed to humans over time, and then we passed down that knowledge. And so anybody who's a moral specialist, an ethicist, will tell you there is no problem at all believing that culture has actually gotten more moral and has learned more about moral values as time has progressed. And that's what we call, I'll have to give this word to you now, it's called epistemology. Moral epistemology. And moral epistemology is the study of how we come to know what's right and wrong. Of how we come to know what's right and wrong. Like math is, how do I know it? Well, I'm taught it. That's pedagogy or something like that. And moral epistemology is how I come to know it. And most people get this confused with the other thing I was talking about with grounding. I'm teaching you a couple key words. You can, with this and $5, buy some Starbucks, but nevertheless, this is what we call in philosophy moral ontology. That's that grounding issue I was talking about. Why is it wrong or right? Is it a brute fact? Epistemologies is how do we come to know it? So Lewis is exactly right. I've taught mathematics by my teachers. And over the years, we're still learning more about math. I mean, right, the most advanced, brilliant minds are still doing abstract math and learning, all this time I never knew this formula worked, and that's fine. But even they will tell you, we're discovering it. We're not inventing it, we're discovering it. And that would say this thing about moral epistemology, that we can discover moral values. So I'm not saying that humans can't learn right and wrong. I am saying that the ontology is that once they learn it, we all go as we grow up and go, no, I agree, it's just wrong. Not because mama taught me it's wrong to torture babies, it's just wrong. What if your parents never taught you that? It's still wrong. It's just, I get it now. Like I grow up and I'm mature. And if I don't, I go get locked up. I mean, there's something we don't lock them up if we don't realize your mathematics. We don't do that. Can I say this one last thing? Because I won't ever preach this way. Because when I'm teaching, I won't ever. There is a difference between moral values and moral duties. Okay? And when we talk about ethics, we call what's called this is a little footnote, no extra charge. Okay? It's called the weight of rules. And when an ethicist study what is the right thing to do, it's called deontology. So if I say, why is it wrong to murder? If someone said, and Elaine said, yes, it's wrong. I say, why? She said, because the Bible says don't murder. That's the rule. Deontologists are people who follow the rules. It's just wrong to do it. Wrong to do it. Other people are called, there's different words, different way to say this. I'll call it, and it's an easier way to understand it, consequentialist. Consequentialism is the belief, of course, you look at the consequence of my action. Well, if I murder, it would then hurt someone's feelings or whatever. You look at the consequence. And that's just obviously what that is, so consequence. Another major one is called virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is whatever is right is that which envelops virtue in the person. It makes them a virtuous person so that their character is formed into a good person. This is Plato, Aristotle, and I would suggest Jesus. And some call it situational ethics, and that's a different thing where they say, well, that depends totally on the situation and blah, blah. Let me stick with the first three. Okay. When we talk about ethics in Christian, now I'm a little footnote in Christianity, but in the world too. When we talk about rules, people get confused sometimes about values versus duties. Okay, so a moral value is things like honor. Honor is a moral value. Is it good or bad to honor a person? In general, right? In general, it's good. To preserve human life. Is that good or bad? In general? In general, it's a really good thing, right? On and on it goes. To tell the truth, honesty.
Good.
All right. Kindness. We can go down the list real quickly. Make a justice. Is it right to be just, or is it right to be a liar? Now, you could take a list of all around the world, and you're going to find the list is overwhelmingly in common. It's amazingly in common. These are moral values, and these moral values are in common across human race. Okay, David, let me ask this question. What about those times when we do lie? What if someone comes and knocks on my... I used to do it to my students all the time. Oh, here, I would do this one. I would say, is it wrong to steal in general? What are they going to say?
Yes.
So I'll put steal is wrong. So is it wrong to steal? They'll say that's wrong. I'll say, let me ask a question now. What if you needed to steal medicine or your mom was going to die? Or I'll say your best friend. Some people didn't have moms or they hated their mom. They say, well, would you steal for that? And then right away someone would say, well, it depends. I don't know. And someone started going, yeah, I'd steal. I say, wait a second. You just told me that was wrong to do that. Well, yeah, but when that happens, what we're doing is we're putting different competing moral values together. And we're comparing, the opposite of steal would be what, honor possessions or something, We'll call it that. Now we have preserve human life as a moral value and honor possessions. They're two different moral values. These are both good things. Well, then the question is, well, I'm also supposed to be honest. What can I lie? If someone knocks on my door and says, it's a murder, and you know they're murdered, where's your family? What are your options? You say, oh, they're right there. You're going to save me some time because I don't like that one and that one. Or do you say, they're down the street, or I don't have a family, or you can keep your mouth shut. But if you said, a lot of people would say, well, lying's okay. The consequence is you're going to save human life. If you're a deontologist, you're going to say, you do not lie. You cannot and do not break the rules. There you go. A consequentialist would say, it's okay to violate one of the moral values as long as a different moral value is upheld, especially if it's more important. And what do you mean more important? Aren't all moral values? Typically in ethics, we don't say that. Typically, we have different weight of the rules. So, for example, most ethicists say that the preserving human life, let's call it a 0 to 10. They'll put preserving human life at a 10. And this, when you're like at 8, 9, 10, we call this, 10 is called an absolute rule. That is, you do not break it ever. Ever you don't break it. When it's beneath a 10, let's say it's a 9 to a 7 or whatever it is, that's what's called prima facie. That is, in face value in general, yeah. Beneath that is rule of thumb. In general, it's good to do that. So a different weight of rules. So, for example, if someone in Judaism, by the way, they have 3 absolute rules. That is, they'll kill you. They'll die. You might as well kill them. They're not going to commit idolatry. They're not going to commit incest, and they're not going to murder. 3 absolute rules. You just go and kill them. And I'm convinced most people do have absolute rules, and if you took time, we could go around the room if this were ethics class and say, what's in your folder? I'm thinking of computers now. What's in your folder of absolute rules? I'm convinced, I'm going to say this, I know more in sermons, I'm just convinced of it. People have different category folders in their mind, in their heart. There's a category of, I call it the hell will freeze over folder. That is, it's never ever going to happen. It's the absolute rule. I will never ever, I don't care what you do, I'm not going to rape a person. I'll kill all your family. Well, they'll be with me with Jesus, but I'm not going to rape a person. I'm not going to murder or go commit incest. I'm not going to do it. And then there's this, well, most of the time, there's the well folder. It depends on, and a lot of people having the well folder stuff that should be in the hell will freeze over folder. And they're real confused about that. And what happened over time is culture tells us there is no absolute folder. There's just a, well, there's just that. And Christianity comes along and changes their life, and they'll go, well, that's right, but, and they're torn between these folders. They're just, and they're going to get that junk on the other one because there are rules that matter. Okay, I'm not going to go on more to that. What I'm saying is, when someone says, David, but even Christians don't have their morality junk together because sometimes they're going to lie they'll lie to preserve human life or whatever it is. The answer is that's right. But preserving human life is a very good thing. And lying is still wrong. It's just better to preserve human life than it is to be honest in that situation. That's what the argument would be. Unless not, Vanna might say, nope, never mind. I'm a deontologist. You don't ever break any of these rules. And I got 12 of these moral rules. You're going to just kill me because I'm not going to break my rules. Most people are not hardcore deontologists. They're lean that way. And by a little footnote when it comes to parenting. Okay, all parents, they're supposed to, train their children to be deontologists. Don't cross the street to chase the daggone ball, you're going to die. Is that true when I'm 60? My mama said, don't touch the stove. Really? Ever the rest of, but as a child, they're deontologists. Don't break the rules. And why not? Because I said so. Well, that teaches them that, because what I do is then you want to tell them the consequence because it's going to burn you, it hurts you. But as they grow up, ideally, parents are supposed to help them form to move away from deontology, to grow up to be much more of a virtue ethics, because it's the right thing to do. I'm trying to form your character. Character is like mold. It's like clay that's being molded, is what I meant to say. I was thinking of a mold of a shape of Jesus, but it's like clay that gets pushed and malleable over time, and it gets harder and harder and harder and harder. And every time we make a decision, we're shaping that clay. And so that's why it's so hard the older you get to start making fundamental changes in behavior, because you just shaped it over and over. It's possible. It's just hard. It's just harder and harder. Can I get a witness? Amen? No, I don't know. It gets harder. So that's why virtue ethics is so important, because it shapes us into the kind of people. We want to be like him.
Respond to that.
That's a very good question. How would Jesus respond to that if someone had to steal for their family? I don't know, because I give some ideas, because there are times that Jesus does things because of his ministry and his role on earth that disciples don't do, and vice versa. So sometimes, I was just telling Lane about this, so in general, when I say, what would Jesus do? Technically speaking, that's not always the question to ask. The more precise is, what would Jesus have us do? Because Jesus, being the Messiah on earth, had certain moral obligations we don't have. So he was morally obligated to be the Messiah, to not sin, to do the right thing. Well, I'm not morally obligated to be the Messiah and heal the sick and go to Galilee and form an apostle group and whatever. Then the question is, what would he have us do? I think, based on my reading, my short answer is, I think he was more what we might call a virtue ethics. Though all three are represented in the Bible. They are. They're all three represented. And I tend not to say this is the only one. I just tend to lean toward that. I think Jesus was much more concerned about trying to have a shape to the person who thinks like a citizen of the kingdom of God, so that more often than not we do the right thing. So I don't think he would say steal. I think he'd say, no, don't do that, because to have a character of not seeing, that's it. Well, what if I die? He would say, well, then I think he would say, you die, look at the sparrows, look at the grass of the fields, that God's going to take care of you. But though Jesus knew people died all the time, and if they died, he'd say, that's just, you stayed faithful to the kingdom of God. I don't think he'd say it's because it's wrong. I don't think he was necessarily a deontologist. He doesn't just, though he does quote from a big, strong list of deontological rules called the Ten Commandments, right? They just talked about in the sermon for those who were in Mark 10. Rich man comes up, what do I do to inherit eternal life? What have you done from youth? Well, I would obey this. Those are rules. And he goes, good, one last thing. And other times they'll talk about things are much more about the virtues. So I'm not real sure. I think he leaned toward virtue, though he's not afraid at all to have some rules in there too. I know. And on that little footnote, there are many times in the Bible where things have happened that we wouldn't say they're moral. I mean, Abraham twice told us, hey, say you're my sister. Oh, they'll take you. The Bible never says, go do ye likewise. It just says that's what he did. That's just what he did. That's consequentialist ethics. And consequentialist ethics will make the argument. They would say, Abraham didn't do anything wrong. because there was a greater good on the other side. If you're a deontologist, you go, how could he? Abraham was a big fat liar. You go back and forth.
Oh, Rahab.
Rahab.
She lied and to hide the spies.
To hide the spy, she lied.
She lied.
And consequentialists say, and that was the right thing for her to do. Deontologist says, well, she lied. That's wrong. Consequently, that's right, she lied, but she picked a greater value, which is preservation of human life. Well, Jesus broke
Tradition.
their interpretation of those moral commandments. And Jesus had no problem with moral commandments, right? He had no problem. If you don't come to me, you deny your will, pick up your cross and follow me. If you don't renounce all that you, Luke 14:33, if you don't renounce everything that you have, you cannot be a disciple. So he had no problem with,
I think that's.
I say, there they are right there.
gotcha. Sure, you do it. Then that would, if I had a category, I'd call that a deontologist. You'd be a deontologist because I won't lie. And I'll leave it at it. Well, the consequences are, and that's what they'll say. I'm going to follow the rules and leave the consequences to God. Whatever he does, I'm going to follow those rules. And my own view, and since I'm not unpacking all this because we're not doing all, I mean, I taught a whole semester on ethics in high school, but my own view is that I don't think one is always the thing. I think there are times when you follow the rules and you absolutely follow the consequences. You stand up for what's right, and that's it. And that's it because he said, don't do it. And sometimes you go, well, why does that matter? Because he's Jesus. That is, in the office of Lord of the universe, he has the moral authority. And my children, many times, my son will repeat this 4 billion times, we still say it. If I said, son, Hayden says, Dad, why not? And I'll say, I don't owe you. There you go. I don't owe you explanation. In the office of Father, I don't owe it to you. Now, I don't say it all the time. Of course, like when I did the parenting, I don't do it all the time. But there are plenty of times I don't know your explanation. I'm your boss. You're not my boss. Jesus is our boss. I'm not his. And so if he says it's better to love your neighbor versus kill him or eat him, I'm going to obey him. Bottom line, I don't care. Well, I don't like that. I want to eat him. It doesn't matter what you feel. He's the Lord of the universe. And if he's not, then what are you doing here? And so in those senses, I'm a deontologist. I just am. He says, love your enemy. I don't want to. It doesn't matter what I want. There are many, many, many times I've done it just because he commanded it. And I've given my life to him, and I said, I will obey you. I'm a disciple. Bottom line, boom, get over it. And what I like about it is I know that because he's so good, whatever I do is good. It's the right thing if I'm obeying him. And that makes me happy. It also means I know that it's shaping my character. As Paul said, he's trying to shape us to the image of his son. And I'm convinced that the more and more I obey his rules, the more he's shaping my clay to be formed in that image. And what we know about the New Testament and those who have died and come back is we still exist. Our soul will keep going on, and our moral character will keep going on. You don't get a reboot. You don't. I'm going to meet you, Roxanne, in the town world, and if you're sweet now, you're going to be sweet then. Just better so. But it's not all of a sudden Hitler goes, no, I'm a nice chap. No, you're a vile, despicable. You're going to stay about. It matters. What we do right now matters in our character. Okay, let's pass around a collection plate because play just as I am. My sermon's done. Okay, moral oughtness, moral rules. There we go. Okay, so I believe God is the best explanation for why there are objective moral values: preservation of human life, being honest, being just. If those really are right and it really is wrong to do the opposite, I think God's the best explanation for that. Number 8, I think God's the best explanation for why consciousness exists. Now, there's a lot here, and I love J.P. Moreland's book on the soul, which I think is in your handout there. And I'm convinced you and I are conscious. I'm convinced. Now, if you're a naturalist, you do not believe that. Consciousness is what you call the state that advanced primates are in when they have a prefrontal cortex of the brain and they're able to make decisions and imagine the future and so forth. But it's not because there is a you that's separate from a brain. So they would say my evolutionary impulses are causing brain chemicals in my brain to move, which causes me to think the things in my brain, which are causing me to say these things so that my brain speaks to the brain in not your body, but to the brain that is in the body that is in front of me. And then how you take these words and translate it are because the evolutionary needs in you that drove your brain to that development and on and on. So if I could really explain it, it would all be explained down to biochemical atoms moving in the brain, chemicals moving in the brain. Okay, I don't find that compelling. I think I'm conscious. I think there is an I. I think I existed earlier today when I was in that office. I think I'm the same one. Well, how is that if all the cells in my brain are changing? How is it I'm the same guy from there to here? How is it I have memory and recollections of what happened in the past? About every 7 years, every atom in your body's changed. How is that possible for me to be the same person? I just think there's all kinds of huge problems if you deny that we are conscious. And I think the consciousness is apart from our brain. You might disagree, and that's fine, but I think we're conscious, and I think you're conscious, and I assume it. Number 9, I think there is a soul. I'm what's called a mind-body dualist. A mind-body dualist. A mind-body dualism, but I'm a dualist, and so that means I believe that the brain, this is the brain on drugs. Remember that commercial? In my mind, this is my, I use it all like a little peanut. Okay, this is my soul. I do this for a little few minutes here. The brain, in my noggin, I think these are separate things. Some Christian philosophers do not think they're separate, that we are nothing but body. Though we are conscious, and they would say, by soul, they really mean that part of you that's alive, but you're not separate. There are Christian philosophers who argue that. They do. I don't find it compelling. There are biblicists who study the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, and they use Bible verses they think to buttress their argument. You need to go read them. I don't find them compelling at all. I'm what's called a mind-body dualist. This is kind of a standard orthodox view in the church, but it's not the only view. But I think it best explains reality. I think it by far explains the Bible the best. And so what I mean is, I think you and I are souls, and that they are somehow parasitically attached somehow to our body. And that the soul affects the brain and affects the body, and the other way. But it's limited to the capacity of the brain. So my brain doesn't think, I think.
So you are your mind?
I am, more specific, I'm going to go there in a second. That's right. I am my mind, yes. I'm going to unpack that a little more here in a second. That's right. So my brain does not think. My brain can store and make chemical reactions, but memories are not in a brain, they're in a mind. And a mind is of the soul. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But my first thing is this, by a dualist means I think they're distinct. So David, well, wait a second, David. What about those people who have strokes? And it just greatly distorts how much they can speak and on and on. The answer is, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Just like I can only catch a ball as well the glove is. My hand is inside the glove, or the analogy a lot of times used is in a vehicle. I can only go as fast and turn as great on those corners depending on the vehicle. What if it's all broken down? There's no tires, no seatbelt, I'm just sitting still. I got a busted up brain. But I can only do what the vehicle will allow me to do. That's exactly how it works with our brain and with our body. I don't have Einstein's brain. I will never be able to think the thoughts he thought because I don't have his brain chemicals. Now, when my soul is set free, we're all in the same boat. Then we'll have, I think, this infinite kind of knowledge. But until that time, our brain limits how much we can understand and know by the brain chemistry in our brain. So it does affect how much we can use it, but it is not the thing itself. And so, David, what about those studies? They can study the brain waves, and they can make a person think of things they can poke in their brain, like when they're doing seizures, and they make them say cow. And now I'm thinking of chocolate milk, and now I'm thinking when I was a child. Absolutely. I'm not denying that they're related. I'm not denying that one can have an effect on the other. I am denying that they're the same thing. And there's a whole lot of reasons to think that. And that J.P. Moreland book, I think it's called What is the Soul and Why Does It Matter, or something like that. It's very, very, I think it's very compelling. One of the reasons why I think a soul exists is because of all the stories of the afterlife. And that book I told you about, I think it's on there, the Evidence of the Afterlife. Then he wrote a sequel called God in the Afterlife. I think there's the best explanation for that. I was talking to a guy on the airplane. I was reading that book, and I was praying and praying. How do I bring up Christianity with this guy next to? We got a captive audience. But I don't want to be that weird guy. But I still want to have a chance to talk about Jesus when I can. So I was praying about it. And I thought, I was reading some stories, and I thought, oh, this would be too good. I need to give him my Kindle and let him read it. And I thought, is that too weird? And he was kind of doing headphones, and finally I said, man, you've got to read. This is amazing. He goes, what's that? This is a book about, and I told him what it was about, is radiation oncologist. In the first book, he did over 1,400 stories, analyzed it. He has 9 lines of evidence for the afterlife of the soul. And in this new book I'm reading now, which I finished on the airplane, called God in the Afterlife, he's read over 4,000 stories. He studied them. It's amazing. You ought to read. It's amazing. And he goes, yeah, that stuff's all been figured out. Now, we've been talking earlier. He's got the beard, the tats, and the whole bit. Yeah, that stuff's, the scientists discovered right before you die, part of the brain's still alive, and it kind of triggers off these memories and stuff like that. I go, huh. Now, I'm thinking, with all kindness, that's nonsense, because I know the data. But that's all it works in common languages. It takes one little, yeah, for the wave of a hand. And most people go, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Or one little Wikipedia page, and it's all whacked, So I said, I've got one chance, and I don't want I'll be argumentative, because I'm not an argumentative person. I think that's against virtue ethics and all that. So I go, well, I don't know, man. That doesn't explain why, when a person comes back to life, they've gained information. And there was a pause for a little bit, and he goes, yeah, that's crazy stuff, man. What's also weird is people say they've come back many lives before, and he just changed the subject. And then I go, yeah, it's interesting, but you ought to read this book. It's amazing. And it was quiet for a while, and he did this kind of stuff. And later on his own, he leans over and goes, yeah, that stuff's crazy, man. It's like a rabbit hole. He just goes down, down, down. I go, yeah, it's amazing. But see, and I try to practice that Greg Kokel, that remember the pebble in the shoe? I just want to bother him in a good way. I just want him to go. Because I said, I really hope you'll read more about it. Just a little bit. And I was praying, like, do I keep going on, do I not? And I felt peace right then, and I think it was peace to stop. But I wanted to, I'm always ready to talk. But my point is, when you read these stories of afterlife, people come back with brand new knowledge. They will come back, this is commonplace. They'll come back and say, one left his body, went up to the 5th floor of the hospital and saw a shoe with a lace down outside the window. Comes back to the body and say, hey, there's a shoe up there. It's exactly where they found it. They'll go and see prayer rooms. One woman died, and she shows up. The pastor shows up, and he has his Bible there, and he goes, well, we missed you this morning in church, whatever. She goes, yeah, I know. She goes, what? So, well, we miss you. We talked about it, and it's a good service. She goes, yeah, because you sang blah, blah, blah. He goes, yeah? How'd you know that? She goes, yeah, I know, because I was there. She had died and visited the church. And he goes, yeah, because, well, what in the world? And he opens the Bible. She goes, yeah, you preach from so-and-so, right? And he goes, yeah. He opens up his Bible. It's highlighted with notes on it. She goes, yeah, you talked about so-and-so, so-and-so. Because she had died while in the hospital and come back. But how does that happen? People will meet dead relatives, people who died in the womb, siblings that never do exist. They'll come back and say, Mom, I have a sister. They go, no. I met her. She looks like the blah, blah. And they never told her about the miscarriage. They'll come back. This happens. They'll say, yeah, I met Grandma so-and-so there. And they'll come back. And now grandma's there, but when they died, the person was alive. But there she is too. And they'll come back and go, I'm glad you're back. And in the context of the story, they'll say, I'm sorry to tell you too, Grandma died this morning. I go, yeah, I know. I was with her. And it happens every time. They never meet a live person. They're always dead. Every time. This goes on and on and on and on. Some great-great-grandfather comes up. They've never met in their entire life. Never seen a picture of him. They come up, hey, you're so-and-so. We're related. So how do they gain knowledge of that kind of stuff if you're just simply dead? I'm convinced the best explanation is because we survive after death. You cannot read those books and come away and go, it's just a white light and we're done. There's no conceivable naturalistic explanation for that. If we're just random atoms in motion, it is inconceivable to be dead, have consciousness after the death, and come back. People wake up, I'm going on and on, because they're so cool. One day I'm going to do some sermon series on this. They wake up, and they were floating with a body, and there was a bunch of nurses and doctors and holding hands praying for the patient. He was like, who are they praying for? And he looked and realized there was their body. One time he woke up and a guy, he was doing surgery, he died, and the surgeon were talking about the golf that weekend and all the stuff they're going to do for the vacation, and he died to come back. Now he was completely under. He flatlined. He came back and said, yeah, you're going to go golfing, right? He goes, how did you hear? They'll come back. That happens all the time. I think the soul exists. Okay, you said the mind, right? Was that you that said the mind? Okay. I think the soul exists. And most people who talk about a soul, Christian philosophers, say the soul has various capacities. Various capacities. I like to think of the Swiss Army knife. It's just a cool little dude. I almost brought it. It's in my truck. You pull it out. It's got razors and a knife. It's got capacities. Our soul is like that. We have the capacity to think and to reason. Listen, that aspect of the soul, that capacity, we have a word for it, and you used it, mind. So when I say the word mind, I'm talking about that capacity of a soul which allows me to reason. When the Bible talks about that aspect of the soul which is alive, it's not dead, and simultaneously, the aspect of the soul which relates to God, they have a word for that. spirit. We have the capacity to have feelings. We have the capacity to have sensations, and on it goes. J.P. Moreland talks about all this. So the soul, or he used the analogy of a chest of drawers. There's a lot of drawers on them. It's the same thing. It's got a lot of capacities. And in the Bible, the part of our soul which relates to God's Spirit is broken. It's wounded. It's deficient and turned off because of some little thing called sin. And that's why we call it a spiritual rebirth. The parts of it that relates to God, that's what get changed over. 2 + 2 = 4, no matter if I'm a pagan, Satan worshiper, or worship God. The mind's not, it's on all the things in life are not fallen. My mind about religious things, about God is what's fallen. And we call that the spirit. But when Paul says the things of the flesh, thoughts of the flesh, he's talking about those things that relate to this.
So
Now,
what about the heart of the man?
that's good too. That would
Is
be
that a combination of the mind and the spirit? Or is
probably so. Mind and spirit, or more, probably a little more. It depends on the context. But Jews use heart to usually mean the center of volition, the part of me that makes decisions. But at times, they use it in a way of feeling. At times, typically not. In the ancient world, feelings were in the gut, or in the Greek splagnoi, their gut innards. It's where we get the expression, I felt a feeling in my gut, or it was gut-wrenching. That's the exact word we use when Jesus saw someone, and your translations say, and he felt compassion. The word is, he felt movement in his splagnoi. He felt it felt gut-wrenching, because that's where you felt things. You thought things in your heart. You felt it in your gut. Well, now, because of our Roman background, we've shifted it up now. So we've got, just go up. Now we feel in our heart and think with our mind. So the answer is, it depends on the context, but in general, they would say mind equals heart. In general, not all the time. It depends on the context. And Jesus says, love your neighbor, heart, soul, strength. And he adds the word mind. In Deuteronomy 6:5, it doesn't have mind. But that's why little footnote, that's why a lot of New Testament interpreters think Jesus might not have said the word mind, but Mark, and then of course Matthew and Luke, added it to convey it to a Roman audience who didn't think that way. And some might say, well, no, Jesus added it to help them think, okay, fine. But to an Aramaic Hebrew audience, they might not have needed the word mind. That's why Deuteronomy 6:4-5 says heart, soul, and strength.
So your soul and spirit are not necessarily the same thing?
So the soul and the spirit are not necessarily the same thing. Yes, ma'am, that is right. There are people who say they are synonymous. And the only time in the Bible I can think of a place at all where it seems to be synonymous is from the lips of Jesus. And it's in Luke's Gospel on the cross. And he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. He seems to mean all of him, not just part of his soul. That every other instant I've looked up, I don't think that's what's going on. I think they're talking about the aspect of the soul which is either alive or relates to God. So again, it's not a hard and fast rule. And, let me try one more time. It's not a hard and fast rule of how the biblical authors use it. In Christian philosophy, they're usually very consistent, as we've reflected over the years. Does that make sense? So in the Bible, it's not always hard, like my example answer to you, which is heart always equals mind, or combination. The answer is, it depends on the verse, but in general, it's mind. So in the Bible, in general, spirit equals that part of us which is alive, or that part of relate to God.
So when you say, when someone dies, what would you say? Their spirit goes to be with God, their soul goes to be with God?
Yes.
Both?
Because, what I would say, because of my training though, we would say in Christian philosophy, their soul has gone to be with God. That includes the spirit. That includes the mind. You see what I'm saying? Because all the capacities go with you. But does that mean in church or Christian, well, I need to start saying soul from now on? No, you don't go to hell if you say spirit. It just means technically speaking, I would use the word, well, I do use the word soul. We are a soul with a body.
What's the spirit part?
That aspect of us, of our soul, which is alive and not dead, and it's the same aspect which relates to God. You say, well, why make up a word for that? Well, why do we make a word called mind? Instead of saying that aspect of us that has rational thought. Let's give that a word called mind. Let's say, so technically you think with your soul. Your soul thinks. By the way, you are a soul, and you're thinking with your soul. But I have a word for that part of you. I'll call it mind. It's a beautiful mind. Okay. So there's more there. Go read the books. Go read the books. Again, there are other views on this. I just don't find it compelling. I think God's the best explanation. Number 10, and we're done. I think God's the best explanation for why we enjoy beauty. Why in the world did I put a sunset on the front of that little devotional? Why across the globe you pick almost any culture in the world that's ever existed and go, is it ugly or beautiful, or does it not matter at all if you see a sunset? They're going to say it's beautiful. They're going to see, I love sunrises and rainbows and waterfall. Why is it we appreciate beauty? And sunflowers. And what conceivable survival mechanism is there that would drive us to love beauty? Why is it universally human to enjoy beauty like that? I think it's because it's just built in our soul to appreciate it, like morality. I didn't put that up here. That's another one. Morality is the ability to apprehend the moral law is one of our attributes. I'll just write it now. So ML. Their ability to apprehend the moral law is part aspect of our soul. I would add the word, and then beauty. The fact that we appreciate beauty, I think, is an aspect of the soul. I think God's the best explanation for that. I think it's just because it's just awesome to like beautiful things. I mean, think about that. It just brings you joy. It just brings you joy. I think about that when we watch the Today Show. They have the orange room or whatever in the background. They have a rotating Instagram images or whatever, and every one of them are sunrises. Over and over and over and over sunrises. Well, they're beautiful. Ah, look at them. And there's another sunrise. It's the same sun, just over and over and over again. And no one goes, I'm tired of those. They're beautiful. It just brings you joy. It makes you happy. I think that's just something cool that God said, I'm going to give you this. And then we look at the universe. We see these pictures of the nebulous clouds. And the word is beautiful. And God gets to see all of it. I think he appreciates beauty. I mean, that's why Elaine married me. I married her. Just a joke. Hey, any questions or comments about any of that?